Welcome back to the Resolution Room. I'm Robert Holmes. Today, I want to talk about one of those topics that makes everybody sit up a little bit straighter: harassment. That word carries weight, and it should. When someone says they are being harassed, it deserves to be taken seriously. It deserves attention, care, and follow up. But here is the uncomfortable truth: not every uncomfortable workplace interaction is harassment. Not every rude supervisor is creating a hostile work environment. Not every disagreement is retaliation. Not every time someone holds you accountable means you are being targeted. And I know that may sound blunt, but stay with me, because this episode is not about dismissing people. It is not about telling employees to toughen up. It is not about protecting bad managers. It is actually the opposite. When we use the word harassment, we protect the people who actually need protection. When we understand what harassment is, we are better able to identify it, report it, investigate it, and stop it. But when everything becomes harassment, the word starts to lose clarity. And when the word loses clarity, people who are experiencing real discrimination, retaliation, or abusive conduct can get buried under a pile of ordinary workplace frustration. So today, we're going to slow it down. We are going to talk about what harassment is, what it's not, why people often confuse accountability with mistreatment, and how this same idea applies not just to work, but in real life. By the end of this episode, I want you to have a practical way to think through conflict before you react, before you report, and before you label someone else's behavior. Because conflict is not always the enemy, confusion is. If you work in employee relations long enough, you start to notice patterns. Someone comes to HR and says, "My supervisor is harassing me." So you ask, "What happened?" And they say, "She keeps asking me why my reports are late." Or, "He told me I have to come into the office 3 days a week." Or, "My manager gave me a written warning and I feel singled out." Now, could any of those things be part of harassment issue? Possibly. Context always matters. But on their own, those examples are usually not harassment. They are usually management actions. They may be uncomfortable. They may be poorly communicated. They may even be unfair in some cases. But unfair and unlawful are not always the same thing. That is one of the hardest lessons in employee relations. There are behaviors that are bad leadership. There are behaviors that are poor communication. There are behaviors that are personality conflicts. And there are behaviors that are unprofessional. But there are also behaviors that cross into unlawful harassment, discrimination, or retaliation. Those categories can overlap, but they are not identical. Think about it like this: if a manager is rude to everyone, that is a leadership problem. If a manager is rude only to women, or only to older employees, or only to employees who requested accommodations, now we may have something different. The behavior matters, but the reason behind the behavior matters too. Here's a common workplace example. Imagine an employee named Marcus. Marcus has been working remotely 2 days a week for a while. Then his department goes through some changes, and his supervisor tells the team they need to be on site more often because of coverage issues and workflow gaps. Marcus is frustrated. He says, "This is harassment. They are forcing me back into the office." Now, from an employee relations perspective, the first thing I would ask is not, do I believe Marcus or the supervisor? That's the wrong place to start. The first question is, what exactly happened? Was the on-site requirement applied to the whole team? Was Marcus the only person required to return? Was the decision connected to a business need? Did Marcus recently complain about discrimination or request an accommodation? Were comments made about his race, disability, age, religion, gender, or another protected category? Was the timing suspicious? Was he treated differently than other employees in a similar situation? All of those details matter. If the whole team is being asked to report on site because the department needs coverage, that may be frustrating, but it is not automatically harassment. If only Marcus is being required to come in and the supervisor has made negative comments about his medical condition, now we need to look closer. Same action, different context, very different analysis. That is why employee relations work is not just about hearing the loudest version of the story, it is about understanding the facts. So, what is harassment? In a workplace context, harassment generally means unwelcome conduct that is based on a protected characteristic. That could include race, color, religion, sex, national origin, age, disability, genetic information, sexual orientation, gender identity, veteran status, or any other categories protected by law, depending on your state or local jurisdiction. Harassment can include offensive jokes, slurs, insults, intimidation, ridicule, threats, physical conduct, or any other behavior that is severe or pervasive enough to create a work environment that a reasonable person would find hostile, intimidating, or abusive. That phrase matters severe or pervasive. One rude comment may be inappropriate and may need to be addressed, but it may not always rise to the level of unlawful harassment. On the other hand, one extremely serious incident can be enough, depending on what happened. And repeated conduct over time can create a hostile work environment, even if each individual incident might seem smaller on its own. So, when someone says, this is a hostile work environment, HR is not just asking, did something unpleasant happen? HR has to ask, was the conduct based on a protected characteristic? Was it severe or pervasive? Did the organization know or should it have known? What steps were taken to address it? That is why the word harassment has a specific meaning. It is not just a synonym for uncomfortable. Now, let me say this very clearly. Just because something is not harassment does not mean it's okay. A manager can be legally compliant and still be a terrible leader. They can avoid violating the law and still damage morale. They can be equal opportunity rude and still create turnover. They can say, I treat everyone the same. And what they mean is, I treat everyone poorly. That is not a defense. That's a confession. I've seen managers who have never made discriminatory comments, never retaliated against anyone, and never violated policy in a technical sense. But they created chaos because they did not know how to communicate. They gave vague instructions. They got angry when employees did not read their minds. They corrected people in front of others. They changed expectations without explaining why. They ignored employees until something went wrong and then suddenly became intensely involved. That may not be harassment, but it is still a leadership failure, and organizations need to address it. This is important because sometimes employees hear that is not harassment and they think HR is saying nothing happened. That is not what that means. It may mean something happened, but it belongs in a different category. Maybe it's coaching for the manager. Maybe it's mediation. Maybe it is clarification of expectations. Maybe it's performance management, and maybe it's a culture issue. Every problem does not require the same tool. You do not need to use a fire extinguisher because someone spilled coffee. You just clean up the coffee. But if there is a fire, you better know where the extinguisher is. One of the biggest sources of confusion is accountability. Accountability often feels personal, even when it's not. If you are late 3 times and your manager talks to you about attendance, that may feel embarrassing. If your documentation is incomplete and your supervisor asks you to fix it, that may feel frustrating. If you are told that your tone in meetings is creating conflict, that may feel offensive. But discomfort does not automatically mean mistreatment. Sometimes discomfort is the natural result of being corrected. Nobody likes being corrected. I do not care how emotionally mature you are. Nobody wakes up excited to receive constructive feedback. Even when the feedback is accurate, something in us wants to defend and fight, explain, justify, or redirect. That's human. But the question is, can you separate the feeling from the fact? Let me give you an example. An employee says, my supervisor embarrassed me in a meeting. That sounds serious. So we ask, what happened? The employee says, she asked me for an update on the project and I did not have one. Now we need more information. Did the supervisor yell? Did she insult the employee? Did she mention something personal? Did she ask everyone for updates and this employee just happened to be unprepared? Or did she single this person out in a way that was humiliating? The facts matter. Sometimes being embarrassed is not the same as being embarrassed by someone. Sometimes we feel exposed when we were unprepared. That does not mean the other person mistreated us. That is a hard but useful distinction. But let me balance this. Managers do not get to hide behind the word accountability. Accountability should be clear, consistent, and connected to job expectations. It should not be personal. It should not be sarcastic. It should not be designed to humiliate. It should not be applied only to certain people while others get a pass. If a supervisor only starts documenting an employee after that employee files a complaint, requests a leave, asks for an accommodation, or reports a safety concern, HR needs to pay attention. That may be retaliation. If a manager says they are addressing performance, but they only enforce the rule against employees from a certain background, HR should pay attention. That may be discrimination. If a manager uses performance conversations to make comments about someone's disability, age, pregnancy, religion, or any other protected status, HR should pay attention. That may be harassment or discrimination. So the message is not, managers are always right. Absolutely not. The message is, we have to analyze the facts carefully. Good employee relations work requires curiosity, not blind belief, curiosity. So, 3 questions I ask. When someone says they are being harassed, first, what happened? Second, why do you believe it happened? Third, who else is being treated this way? Those 3 questions will tell you a lot. What happened? That keeps the conversation grounded in facts. Why do you believe it happened? That helps identify whether there may be a protected reason, retaliation concern, or a pattern. Who else is being treated this way? Helps determine whether the issue is targeted, widespread, or connected to a broader leadership problem. Let me show you how this works. Employee says, my supervisor is targeting me. Well, what happened? She keeps asking me to submit my reports by Friday. Okay. Why do you believe this is happening? Because she does not like me. Okay. Who else has to submit reports by Friday? Everyone. That may be an expectation issue, not targeting. Now let us change the facts. What happened? She only requires me to submit my reports by Friday. Everyone else gets until Monday. Why do you believe that is happening? Well, it started after I reported that she made inappropriate comments about my medical restrictions. Who else is being targeted this way? No one. Wow. Okay. Now we have a very different situation. That does not automatically prove retaliation, but it gives HR something specific to investigate. Specific facts create a path forward. General conclusions just create noise. This is not just a workplace lesson. This is a life lesson. Most of us are walking around reacting to conclusions instead of facts. Your friend does not text you back. Conclusion, they are ignoring me. Fact, they did not text you back. Your spouse seems quiet. Conclusion, they are mad at me. Facts, they are quiet. This has gotten me in a lot of trouble. Someone at church walks past you without speaking. Conclusion, they are acting funny. Fact, they just walked past you. A coworker does not invite you to lunch. Conclusion, they are excluding me. Fact, you were not invited to lunch. Now, sometimes your conclusion may be right. Maybe they are ignoring you. Maybe they are upset. Maybe you are being excluded, but you do not know that yet. And if you respond to the conclusion as if it is a fact, you can create a conflict that did not need to exist. This is where so much unnecessary drama begins. We experience something, we interpret it, we believe our interpretation, then we react to that interpretation. By the time the other person even knows there's a problem, we've already built a whole case against them in our head. That is a dangerous tool. It's a dangerous tool at work and in your personal life, and especially in relationships. So here's a simple tool that you can use. Fact, story, need. First, identify the fact. What actually happened? Second, identify the story. What am I telling myself about what happened? Third, identify the need. What do I need in order to move forward? For example, fact, my supervisor changed my schedule. Story, she is trying to punish me. Need, I need to understand the business reason and whether there is room to discuss alternatives. That is a very different conversation than walking in and saying, you are retaliating against me. Or how about this? Fact, my coworker interrupted me twice in the meeting. Story, he does not respect me. Need, I need to address how we communicate in meetings. You can say, I noticed I got interrupted a couple of times during a meeting. I would appreciate being able to finish my thought before we move on. That is mature. That is clear. That gives the other person a chance to respond. But if you lead with an accusation, most people will defend themselves instead of hearing you. Now, if you are an employee and you believe there's something wrong, here's how you can raise it effectively. But always start with facts, dates, times, what was said, who was present, what happened next. Avoid labels at first. Instead of saying, my boss is harassing me, say, I want to report several incidents that concern me, and I would like HR to review whether or not they may violate policy. That sentence is powerful because it shows you are not just venting, you are asking for review. Be specific about why you believe the conduct is connected to a protected status or a protected activity. For example, after I requested an accommodation, my supervisor began excluding me from meetings I previously attended. Or, my manager has made repeated comments about my age and then told me I may not be able to keep up with the role. Or, after I reported a safety concern, my schedule was changed and I was removed from assignments without explanation. All of those details matter. Also, be honest about your own role. If you were late, say you were late. If you missed a deadline, say you missed a deadline. You can still raise a concern even if you are not perfect. But if you leave out important context, you may weaken your credibility. HR does not need perfection. We just need honesty. Now, managers, let me talk to you for a minute. If an employee says they feel harassed, do not get defensive. Do not say, that's ridiculous. Do not say, you're being too sensitive. Do not say, you always play the victim. Do not say, go ahead, call HR. That last one is especially bad because it often sounds dismissive, even if you did not mean it that way. Instead, slow down. Say something like, I hear that you have concerns, and I take that seriously. I want to make sure the right process is followed, so I'm going to involve HR. That's it. You do not need to investigate yourself. You do not need to argue. You do not need to prove your innocence in the hallway. Bring HR in and let the process work. Also, managers need to understand that accountability lands better when expectations are clear before discipline happens. Don't wait 3 months and then surprise someone with a list of everything they've done wrong. Address issues early, be specific, document expectations, apply standards consistently, and watch your tone. Tone may not always create legal liability, but it absolutely affects trust. One phrase that gets used a lot is hostile work environment. People often use it to mean this place is stressful, or my boss is difficult, or the team culture is negative. But legally, a hostile work environment usually means something more specific. It means the workplace is hostile because of protected conduct or protected status. Again, the reason matters. A chaotic workplace is not automatically a hostile work environment under the law. A demanding supervisor is not automatically creating a hostile work environment. A heavy workload is not automatically a hostile work environment. But if the hostility is tied to race, sex, religion, disability, age, national origin, or another protected category, then we may be in a hostile work environment territory. This distinction matters because solution may be different. If the issue is poor workload planning, the answer may be staffing, workflow redesign, or manager coaching. If the issue is harassment based on protected status, the answer may be investigation, corrective action, training, and immediate protective measures. Again, every problem does not need the same tool. Let me give you an example, a story about two employees. The two employees Angela and David, they both receive written warnings. Angela says, "This is harassment." David says, "I do not agree with it, but I understand what they are saying." Same document, two completely different reactions. Angela, Angela believes the warning is harassment because she feels embarrassed and believes her supervisor dislikes her. David disagrees with his warning, but he focuses on the specific expectations and asks what he needs to do differently. Now, Angela may still have a valid concern. Her supervisor may truly be treating her differently. But if her only evidence is, "I feel like she does not like me," HR may not have enough to establish harassment. That does not mean her feelings are fake or invalid. It means feelings need facts. David's approach is more practical because even if he disagrees, he asks for clarity. What specifically needs to change? What does success look like? When will we follow up? Can I provide additional context for the record? Those are useful questions. They move the conversation forward. The role of documentation plays is huge. Documentation gets a bad reputation. Employees often see documentation as punishment. Managers often see documentation as protection. HR sees documentation as memory because 6 months from now, nobody remembers the conversation exactly the same way. Documentation helps clarify what happened, what was expected, and what was communicated, and if there was any follow up. But documentation should be factual. If you're an employee documenting concerns, write down what happened, not just how you felt or how you interpreted it. Instead of, "My manager bullied me again," write, "On Tuesday at approximately 2:15, during the team meeting, my manager said, 'This is the third time this report has been late,' in front of 4 coworkers." That gives HR something to review. If you are a manager documenting performance, same rule applies. Instead of, "Employee has a bad attitude," right? "Employee interpreted 2 coworkers during the staff meeting after being asked to allow others to finish speaking." Facts are more useful than adjectives. Why is this good news? Why would it ever be good news that you're probably not being harassed? Because if this issue is not harassment, it may be more flexible than you think. If it is a communication issue, you can clarify. If it is a workflow issue, you can redesign. If it is a personality conflict, we can set boundaries. If it is unclear expectations, we can be more specific. If it is poor leadership, we can coach the manager. If it is a simple misunderstanding, a conversation may repair it. That is good news because harassment requires a formal response, and it should. But many workplace conflicts can be addressed before they become formal complaints. Not everything needs to become a war. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is ask a better question. Here's a question I want you to take with you. Am I being treated this way because of who I am, because of something legally protected, or because of what is happening in the workplace? Because of who I am might point to discrimination or harassment. Because of something legally protected might point to retaliation. Because of what is happening in the workplace might point to performance, operations, communication, or leadership. That question does not solve everything, but it helps you start in the right place. And starting in the right place matters. Here's what I know: people want to be respected, people want to be heard, people want to feel safe, people want to believe they are being treated fairly. Those are reasonable needs. But fairness does not mean we will never be corrected. Respect does not mean we will never be challenged. Safety does not mean we will never feel uncomfortable. And accountability does not automatically equal harassment. At the same time, leaders have a responsibility to manage people with professionalism, consistency, and care. You can hold someone accountable without humiliating them. You can enforce expectations without being dismissive. You can require performance without making it personal. That is the balance. Employees need to be careful with labels, managers need to be careful with power, and HR needs to be careful with the facts. And all of us need to be careful with the stories we tell ourselves before we know the whole truth. If this episode made you think about workplace conflict differently, share it with someone who could use it. Maybe it's an employee who feels frustrated. Maybe it's the manager who needs a better way to communicate accountability. Maybe it's just someone who tends to assume the worst before asking the next question. We have all been that person at some point. Next time on the Resolution Room, we're going to keep digging into the messy middle of workplace relationships where policy, personality, power, and perception all collide. Until, remember, conflict is not always the enemy. Confusion usually is. I'm Robert Holmes, and this has been the Resolution Room. See you next time.